So sometimes when we're working with Active Directory, we're in an environment where we need more than one domain. Now, a lot of times working with one domain is going to be just fine, but there are a few instances in which we might want to create an additional domain. So one example might be, let's say we're running an application that requires a forest function level at a specific level or a domain function level. Let's say it requires a domain function level of Windows Server 2012. But we go to add another application that requires the domain function level to be higher, say 2016. Well, if both of them require different things, then we might need to separate them and create two domains. Another reason that we might want to do this is if we are worried about security. So we want a little more separation between different groups of users in our organization. Another one might be for division of administrative control, right? We want to separate out some administrative controls so that we have some administrators working on one part of our network, some administrators working on another part, but we don't have administrators that have control of everything. So lots of different reasons why we might want to do that. So let's walk through how we would do this. So I've already got my server up and running. I've already changed the server name. I have set its IP address. And here's a big thing. I've made sure when I set this that I set the DNS server to be the same as my previous DNSer. So I've got another server here running Active Directory as a domain controller for my domain, for my first domain. And it's using DNS, so I want to have this one use that same DNS server. So my IP configuration is set up. I have also installed Active Directory users and computers, and this just now flagged for me. So I've got Active Directory users and computers, or Active Directory domain services. There we go. Get the right terminology in place. Now I want to promote this to a domain. Now there's two different ways I can do this. Number one is I can start by joining this server to the existing domain. And then when I do that, I can log in as a domain admin, do whatever I need to do. Or I can do it without joining this computer to a domain, which is what I'm doing this time. Normally I'll join it, but this time I wanted to go ahead and show you how I would do it if I haven't previously joined this thing to the domain. So I'm going to come to my post-deployment configuration. I'm going to say promote this server to a domain controller. Now, because it's not a member of a domain, actually, even if it is, it's going to give me options here. I want to specify that I want to add a new domain to an existing forest. Now, what we've done before when we're creating something brand new is we'll add a new forest. If I wanted an additional domain controller for an existing domain, I'd do this. But here I want to add a new domain. So I need to specify which type of domain. So a child domain is going to share namespace. So my parent domain is going to be dalton.local, and then my child domain will be a subdomain below that. A tree domain does not share namespace. So when I set tree domain, I set the forest name and the new domain name. When I set a child domain, I need to identify my parent domain. So I need to put that in, but I want to be able to browse for that. So I'm going to click select. Also, real quick, I want to point this out. I have no credentials provided, which I'm working as a local admin. I do not have permissions to do that into the domain. So I'm going to have to provide additional credentials to do it. I'm going to do that here. I'm going to click on select, and it's going to ask me what credentials I'm going to use to browse the network for domains. And this needs to be an administrator in my existing parent domain. So I'm going to do Dalton \administrator. So this identifies the domain and then my administrator account, and then set my password. And when I search, it finds dalton.local as my existing domain. Now, if I had more than one, you'd see them pop up here too. So I'm going to click that and dalton.local. Now, also notice down here, supply the credentials. It's assuming that I want to use the credentials that I just used to browse the domain, which is accurate. So if it's not, I could click change here and change credentials. So I need to specify my new domain name. And I'm going to be really creative, and I'm just going to call this child because it's going to be a child domain. In reality, you'd pick a name that actually made more sense. But and notice I don't specify the whole thing. I can just specify child, and it will append .dalton.local. So I'm going to click next. If I did child.dalton.local, then my main name would be child.dalton.local.dalton.local because it's still going to apply it. So I can set my domain function level. I'm not setting a forest function level. That's already set by my forest root domain. I can decide whether I want this to be a DNS server and or a global catalog server. I'm going to go ahead and leave both. Actually, you know what? Just for the fun of it, let's uncheck DNS because we already have an existing DNS server. I'm just going to use that one. Practically speaking, I'd probably want two, but practically speaking, I'd have two domain controllers already. So I'm going to go ahead and set my password to, this is my directory services restore mode password. So this is that password that if everything breaks, this is what we have to deal with. The other thing I can do, because I have multiple sites here, and sometimes we're going to want our child domains to be in the same site. Sometimes we're going to want them to be in a different site. So here's where I can select which site, and I've already got some sites created. I'm going to go ahead and leave this domain in Yakima because that's where the IP addresses are that I've got this thing at. So I'm going to click next, and then it's going to, does this whenever we're working with creating a new domain, it's going to look for the NetBIOS domain name, and this will potentially be the longest part of the operation, but it finds it, and we're good with that, so we click next. The paths, we're going to have this anytime we promote a domain controller, as soon as it pulls that up. Where are we going to store our database, our log files, or sysvol? The default is to store them on C drive. If you want them stored on another drive, which can be really useful, especially if it's another physical disk, so you have additional heads, you can change the location here. But for this, since I'm doing this inside a VM, that's not really an issue. So review my options. If I'm happy with it, I click next. It runs my prerequisites check, same as we do for any other domain controller promotion. And once it's happy with the prerequisites check, I can click install. Now, this, like any other domain controller install, it's going to take it a few minutes and it's going to force a reboot. So when this thing reboots, the SAM account database will be gone and I will have to log in using my domain account, which is true for any domain controller. For a member server, they still have the local accounts database, and so you can log in using a local account or a domain account. This one, because it's a domain controller, I'm going to have to log in using a domain account. Let's go ahead and reboot this. Hopefully this shouldn't take too long. Close that while it's at it. It should reboot here in just a second. And once it reboots, there we go. We should be able to log into our child domain. So let's let this come back up. We'll reconnect. Oh, take it a minute, connect again. It's going to take it a second longer. Okay, so I am going to open up my Hyper-V again and open up my, here's my homework 2 computer, connect, and it's working on it. There we go. We're starting to come back up now. Maximize that. That's what we want. There we go. Now, as our server comes back up, we'll go ahead and be able to log in. I'm going to go ahead. It's still doing a bunch of stuff in the background from the domain controller promotion. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this while it finishes off the operations. When it's ready to log in, I'll go ahead and pick up the recording again. Okay, so our reboot is done, and we are now ready to sign in to child. So I'm going to sign in as administrator. And this will come up for me. Let me switch this to, let me just try to maximize that. There we go. Now it's maximized. Okay. And so now our server's back up. We go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. and we are managing child.dalton.local. There we go. Our new domain is up and ready to run.